In this video, we're going to learn all about React Native. We'll only need some basic React skills, and building on those, we're going to be able to build out the beginnings of the Facebook Messenger application. So in this video, we're going to use React Native CLI. We're not going to use the React Expo CLI, and the reason for that is we know that we're going to be building a large project out. React Expo is great for, prototyping basic applications, but if you know you're going to be using different libraries, different packages, right from the get-go, the React Native CLI shines for real projects, let's say. Now we're going to use the React Router library. It's very similar to React Router, how it works in React. And that's just going to allow us to navigate, from the different screens to the chat page and back. We're also going to use React Native Paper. That's the name of the UI library. Very easy to use. It's just like using React Native. So it's just like using React Material UI, just the React Native version of that. So this video, we're going to set up React. We're going to look at, the folder structure, some of the basics, but it's also suitable not just for beginners, but also for people wanting to build out a real React Native project. And we'll be building out the React Facebook Messenger clone. So check it out, and let's dive into the code. This is going to be a React Native tutorial suitable for anyone that's never used React Native, or also for people that have used React Native, as we're going to start from the ground up. We're going to build out the Facebook Messenger clone. All you need to do or have to follow along with this series is just basic React knowledge. So you should be able to at least build a CRUD application in React. And building on those skills, we're going to build a Facebook Messenger clone. So the first thing you want to do is you want to come to reactnative.dev, to the docs, to the environment setup, and you want to set up the emulators on your machine. So just go ahead and come here, and all you have to do is follow through the instructions. It's important to note that if you're on a Windows machine, like I currently am, you won't be able to get the iOS emulator on your machine. So you'll need an Apple device for that. But don't worry, we will swap over to my Mac machine later on and make sure everything works on there as well. I'm just more comfortable on the Windows, so I do most of my work on the Windows, and then I cross over to the iOS at the end to make sure everything's working on there. So basically, what we want to do is we want to come to our React terminal here. Our Visual Studio Code terminal. I'm currently in a React Native folder with a bunch of other React Native projects in here. But don't worry about those. I'm going to run a command to create the React Native application. So I'm assuming that you follow the documentation and you're able to get everything set up. And then we can run npx React Native, and then you can run init, and then I'm going to call this the Facebook Messenger. Actually, I might just call it Facebook Messenger. Facebook Messenger. Just like that. And we can just go ahead, and we'll need that React Native package. And then I'll just let that install. So basically, while that's installing, I want to show the application that we're going to build here. So we can see that we have the ability to jump between the different pages, different tabs here. So we've got the Stories tab, the People tab, the Calls tab, and the Chats tab here. And then I also got some simple profile pictures and usernames here. And then you can click on an individual profile, and then they'll navigate you to this other page. It shows you the particular ID. So this says ID 1, and we'll be able to hook into that when we, in the next video, hook up API requests with Axios and do some authentication stuff. But just to keep things nice and simple, we can navigate back and forth. So it looks like things have loaded up for us. So I'll go ahead and I will Control C this, and I'll also make sure to close this terminal. So I think the very first thing we want to do here is we want to CD into the Facebook Messenger application. We need to go back one. CD into the Facebook Messenger folder here. So I'm just going to run a code-r dot, just because I want to jump into that particular folder here. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of the file structure here. So if you've used React before, and I hope you have, I've got playlists on React, such as the Amazon clone series. The folder structure will look similar, but it looks like there's a few extra things in here. So let's just go through that. So package.json, that's obviously where all the dependencies are managed. tsconfig, that's the TypeScript stuff. It's important to note that in the latest versions of React Native, TypeScript's a first-class citizen, meaning it comes bundled with it. Previously, you had to select the TypeScript template. But that's why we got this tsconfig JSON file. We also got this metro configs, which helps when you load up the application to look at it. We got the standard index.js file, which bootstraps the main app file. Then we got this gem file, and we also got this Ruby version. The reason we have that is because on iOS, we actually need to use Ruby behind the scenes to be able to, start our iOS application up and install some of those dependencies and stuff like that. Then we've got Babel. That just helps transpile or compile our code into such that it works with older devices. We got this watchman config. There's nothing really in there, but so we also got this prettier thing here. It comes with prettier and ESLint. We're just extending the React Native community guidelines. So so our code's formatted in a nice way. While we're here, I might just go ahead and I'll just add in a end of line. I believe it's here in the prettier RS end of line. I'll just set this to auto here just because I was playing with some settings and I was getting this error for the CR, carriage return, as I was swapping between the Mac and the Windows devices. Node version, that's just the version you got installed. Git ignore obviously ignores the files when you go to commit to GitHub. Node modules, they're all the dependencies. And the two main different folders here, we have the Android folder and the iOS folder. Now this might look a little overwhelming, but actually we don't really need to come into it that often. The main benefit of React Native is we can essentially have our source code and our React code is just like a React code base with a few, differences, which I'll cover. But within a few days, you can more or less get up and running with React Native. And then after about a month or two, you can really feel comfortable as if you were just in a React code base because it's quite similar. But with the iOS and Android stuff, each of the devices, well, basically you write your React Native code as normal, and then you can build it, and you can build it and bundle it to the Android and iOS devices. So you don't really have to come into here. The only time you have to come into here is if you're doing something like where you need the phone, the user's permission. So if someone wants to access the images or the files or upload or know your location or stuff like that, sometimes you have to go into the platform specific stuff and add a few permission related things, and you might have to install, particularly on iOS you need to go in and there's extra installations that need to be done. But the good news is that is all really easy, because in all of the libraries that we use, they have documentation on that. So you pretty much just install the library and copy and paste a few lines of code in there, and then that all works out for us. So let's just look at the app.tsx file. So it's quite large at the moment. And what I might do just before I run the application is I might just install a couple of dependencies. So if I just open up the command line again, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run npm install. Now we saw in the demo at the beginning of this video what we're building, and we're actually using a library, and I'm using React Native Paper, and that's just like a UI component library. It's sort of like Material UI but specific for React Native. There are quite a few of these, so you just got to have a look at them and see which components they have and all that sort of stuff. And I found this one to have a nice tabs component that I could use, and that was one of the first things I wanted, so I pretty much just got this. I do like Tailwind quite a lot, but I wanted to mix it up a little bit and just try something else out. And then part of this UI library, if you look through the documentation, they have icons, and so let's try find one in particular. I don't know if we'll have it or not, but here you can see there's a button with a icon associated with it. For the icons to work, we also can just use the material design icons. So you can just come to material design icons, and let's say you want a heart or something like that. You can just search for that, and then we can use these icons. They work with the React Native Paper, and we'll see all of that, and we'll set that up. So we can come here and we can just run npm install React Native Paper, and then we're going to need React Native vector icons, and then we're also going to need React Native safe area context. And the safe area context, basically on your phone, on your mobile device, you know how you got that little camera up the top. It just makes sure that our screen doesn't get lost behind there, so that gets chipped out away from there. And then there's a particular wrapper that's getting used here. Again, the React Native vector icons, they're relating to the icons that we need to use in the React Native Paper library. One final thing here is I'll also have React Router Native. Now, React Router Native is very similar to the React Router that you use in regular React apps. And that's one of the reasons I like it, is because it's just so similar to that. You have to navigate hooks and all of those sorts of things, params and stuff like that you can use. And that just helps to navigate between the different screens that you're on. So that's a helpful library, and we'll use that. One thing to note is I'm currently on a Windows machine, but when you install some of these packages, sometimes you need to look at the documentation. Not always, but depending on the package that you use, you might have to CD into the iOS folder and run npx pod install. Now I'm on a Windows machine, so I'm going to get this, Cocoa Pods is only supported on Darwin machines message, which basically means that it's not going to let us do that. But if you set everything up on the Mac, and I will jump back over to that later on, but essentially, you need to have that Cocoa Pods to be able to install the dependencies and stuff like that for certain, not all, but certain applications. So just to illustrate one of the differences, if we come to the documentation for the React Native vector icons, this package, if you look at the Android documentation, and this is just something you sort of got to get used to with React Native, is you got to go to the documentation for the library that you're using, and then you got to look at the instructions for both Android and also iOS. So I'm on Windows here, and not always, but sometimes, like in the case of icons, that might be like a platform specific thing. So the icons look slightly different on different devices. You need to actually go into the Android code. So it's really easy. Like they tell you exactly what to do. So you can just like copy this line here, and then just go to the file here. We don't have to worry about all this stuff. And if you are on a Mac, you'll have to just do the similar sort of thing for the iOS. Something we'll come back to. But just to keep things simple for now, let's just use one emulator, and let's just do an Android because everyone can use that. So we can jump in to the Android folder here, and we can go into the app folder, and we can go into the build Gradle file. I believe it's here. So let's have a look here. So Android app build Gradle. Okay, so it's this one here. There's two build Gradle files, so you just got to make sure you get the right one. So we can see that we've got this apply plugin for the Android. Just below here, we can say apply from Node Modules React Native Vector Icons. So we can grab that there. So with all of that, let's just run a, what is it? We just need to start this up. So we can just come to, it's npm run Android. And just to make sure, come to the package.json file. We see this, got this Android command. And then we also got this iOS command. So you can also run that one as well. So I'm currently on Windows. So I'm going to look at the Android emulator with Android Studio. So make sure you go through that documentation to set that up. Otherwise you will get stuck at this point here. Basic stuff. Sometimes it takes a little while to load for the first time, but once you've got it installed, and if you already know React, you should be quite comfortable with installing packages. So hopefully there's no dramas with that. Don't worry about that squiggly line there. So let's just wait for this to load. And one thing you'll note is it opened up this like node terminal metro thing. It's important to note that if you run, like, let's say you're on Mac and you want to run the iOS emulator, you sort of have to close this and reopen it. And even if you're rerunning some of the Android stuff, sometimes it gets into a state where if this is open, it's sort of like the last session. And if something errors, then it gets into like a strange state. It's a good habit every time you start it or stop it, your server, to close this and then rerun the start command. Just so everything runs smoothly. So this is taking a little while. So let's just go back to the app TSX file. And let's just collapse this for the time being. We can see that in React Native, we can see that we got all of these components. And this is one of the first differences between React and React Native is on a mobile device, there is no, like in the native applications, there is no browser. So because there's no browser, we don't use things like HTML, like divs and regular HTML. This is XML, I'm pretty sure, which is like a superset of HTML, meaning, well, basically all that means is we use the tags the same way where we got the open and close tags. But we need to make sure that we're using actual components. And the good news is there actually isn't that many. Like if you look at the React documentation, and then we just have a look at some of the basics, let's say, you can see that there's these core components and native components, and there really isn't that many. Like there's a text field. So if you want to use text, you got to use a text, either a text or text input. You know, there's a view, a scroll view, and actually it might be easy just to look at the basic setup we got here. So a view is basically just like a div. This section, that's actually like one of their components that they built. So let's just get rid of that. Actually, I sort of want to show, yeah, here's what it looks like when you load it up. So basically what's happening here, let me just undo that for a second. They just have this section here, which is one of these sections here. But you can see like let's just look at the code and then look at the application. The first thing you'll see is, well, the first thing to note on a mobile device is like you have way less space. So you quite often have this scroll view component, and a scroll view component just means like, you know, you take the space up for the screen size, but then you can scroll within it, sort of thing. So that's like a core component, scroll view. And then you got the regular view, which is like, it just doesn't have that scrolling ability, let's say. These sections, these are like the custom things. So let's just go ahead and clear that, learn more links. And then you got like a text field, but you only really got like 3 or 5 of these components that you have to know. And then you end up just like making your own components. Or in our case, we're using like a component library. So we can just get rid of that. One thing to note though is, I don't know if this was obvious before, but each of the elements, they're actually like columns by default. So let me just clear all of this code. Just so we're starting at a relatively empty file here. So let's just get rid of all of this. Get rid of this. For now, we'll get rid of this. We might need to re-import that. We can get rid of that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and just save that. Okay, so, and I'm going to come back to these styles here. So basically, let's just build out a basic page. So we sort of saw what we're going to build. And let's just start off by, let's get rid of this as well. And we've installed that safe area provider. So this is going to do a similar sort of thing. We can just wrap our application, but then this works with the particular UI library that we're going to use. So we can just go ahead and we can just save that there. Okay. So if you're familiar with providers, we'll know that this is just going to be wrapped around our actual code. So let's just start off by having a simple view here. And this is just to illustrate a few concepts. And then we'll just have a text here. So this is like one of the most basic applications in React Native that you'll probably ever see. And if you're familiar with React Native, you might want to skip through this introductory section if you haven't already, but pretty much right now we're going to actually get into the React Native paper and also the navigation stuff. So we're going to get into that now. And we're also going to be building a complete Facebook Messenger clone using this. So I'm just sort of making sure that for anyone that's just complete beginner in React Native that you're able to follow along. But we're also going to jump into some more advanced stuff pretty quick as well, but using some of the foundational tools. So the first thing you need to do is you have to import these from React Native. So I think of Vue pretty much in the same way as I think of a div, and text I think of like either a H1 or a paragraph. If you put the text outside of a text, you will get an error. So if you write text, it has to be strictly within. So let's just close that just for now. Oh, I forgot about this. If you get this error where React must be in scope when using, I believe the solution today is because we've installed paper or whatever, we need to actually, so basically we got to come to the ESLint file and then just add this rules here, because we're on a latest version of React. This was for older versions of React, where JSX uses React in JSX scope. If you add those to lint, basically they'll get rid of that error there. So let's just go ahead and see where we're at. So basically we can see our application. We can see that we've got this little black thing at the top, and that's simulating the area at the top of your mobile device. And the safe area, just make sure that, because some devices, they have like a camera that's sort of in this middle at the top section there, cuts off. This just makes sure that our whole application fits well on the screen. So that's what the safe area provider does. Vue. The one thing to note about Vue, or any of these elements, is by default, React Native uses Flex. So if you're not familiar with Flex, you should just have a quick look up on Flex. The difference is that usually Flex rows the default, but because we're on a mobile device where the rows are small and it's like one, the Y plane is really long, it makes more sense for the column to be the dominant axis. So by default, Flex uses column. So that's just one thing to note, is that if you're used to doing like justify center for your Flex and item center, just know that they're flipped around. That's just something that just takes like a little bit to get used to. So basically I'm using this paper library for the actual components, but one thing to talk about before we jump into using third-party libraries is just using regular styling. So basically, to do regular styling, you have to do this like style sheet thing. So you can just import that from React Native. And then on the style sheet itself, like for example, let's say what we want to do is we want to have a container for our application. And let's say we want to have a background color of red, so super basic stuff. And then on our actual element or our container, we can just reference the styles style sheet that we're creating, and then we can just have our container there. So it's just regular CSS wrapped around this style sheet create function, which then we can consume by our different elements that we're using. And it's important to note that these are not web elements. There's like basically 5 or 10 React Native elements, and we'll probably see all those in the course of just this first video. So yeah, let's have a look at that. So we can see that we got this red background here. So one thing to note, one property, like one CSS property that's really, really important to know what it does in React Native is flex. So the reason flex is so important is, or flex 1 in particular, is because basically what flex does is it takes up the remaining space. So before we saw that the red line ended underneath by, but in our mobile device, pretty much everything we want to do and needs to be concerned around taking up the space of the screen or the remaining space of the screen. Even when we've got scrolling involved, because scrolling is still related to just having the screen size, like the height of the screen, and the scrolling happens within that height. So flex 1, and just knowing that every element is a column, a flex column, and the property flex 1, that's huge. That's just like half your CSS basically for everything. So, I mean, obviously there's more to React Native than just that, but we've sort of covered the markup, the HTML equivalent, and we've also handled the CSS sort of stuff. If you like Tailwind, you can install Tailwind, and then you could have like class name, and then you could have something like, BG Red 400. You might prefer that. I actually do prefer that. I just wanted to play around with another UI library. So that's why I'm doing it this standard approach or default approach. But it's good to see this as well, especially since this is the first video on the React Native. But again, if you're watching this video, chances are you've been a developer for some time, and you probably have your own preferences. The good news is React, the JavaScript code, and is basically the same as how you write JavaScript in React. So it doesn't really take that long to get up to speed with using these elements rather than the HTML elements. And styling, you can even make similar to web projects, or you could take this approach where it's more like a CSS approach. And then pretty much everything else is just the same as regular React. So let's go ahead and just use the, use the library. So I think what I want to start by doing is I want to make those tabs. So it's really quite simple. We can just come to the React Native paper documentation, and they call it a bottom navigation. And if you look at their bottom navigation, you see they've got this sort of thing here, which is pretty much what we've got. So I'm just going to copy that. Pretty much all of this code I can just copy. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. And rather than having all of this stuff here. Oh, before I do that though, one thing is to note is when we're using React Native paper, we need to wrap everything in this paper provider. So I don't know if that's going to get the import for us or not. Probably not. But we can just go ahead and import that. So from React Native, so let's import that. So we can import provider as paper provider from React Native paper. And they give it to you as provider, but I'm going to explicitly call it paper provider just to avoid any ambiguity. Why can't I say that word? Yeah, it's just to make it clear that this is related to the paper provider. So yeah, so that threw me off for a second. I don't know what happened there. So basically we can just have our normal React code here. I'm just going to go ahead and import use state. Let's just go ahead and import that from React. We no longer need this text or this view, or we might need the view, I'm not sure. Actually, we'll probably need the text as well. But basically what we can do is we can just go ahead and we can have our bottom navigation, they call it here. So let's just go ahead and throw that in there. Now, I don't really like the word bottom navigation. It is a bottom navigation. But in the React Native paper library they use, it isn't just this part here. It's also what's rendered above it in this screen here as well. So these are sort of like the main screens. So even though they import it at the bottom navigation, or call it bottom navigation, I more think of it as the screens. So you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to go ahead and call it as screens, just because that makes more sense to me. So yeah, so let's just go ahead and just save that. Now I'm going to use this text. I don't know if I need the view. Actually, I don't need the text either because they got the text from React Native paper. So I'm just going to put that in there as well. And rather than, like, what they're doing here is they're using, like, I don't know why they're doing it like this, but they're basically rendering the component. I prefer something simple like this. So let's just call this music here. Save that. What's wrong with that? Oh, do I need to, probably need to call that screens now. Yeah. Does that need to be like that? I'm not sure actually. Oh my God. Okay, so I'm not really sure why that was happening. So we no longer need the styles, so we can just get rid of those, which means we can get rid of the style sheet here. So let's see here. I'm just going to copy this just for now. I'm just going to have 2 for now. Which means I can get rid of these here. So they got the key, which corresponds to the element that we're rendering. So we've got the music key and the albums key, which relate to these here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. And I'm going to get rid of this ASLint thing in a moment. I just need to get something up and running. So this is the albums here. So let's see if that's broken everything. Okay, so we've got favorites, and which is related to this title here. And then we've got albums. So we can see already that we've got the component more or less working. So that's how easy it is to get it working. Now we just need to tidy up the code a little bit. So let's do that. And let's make it more specific to what we're actually doing. So yeah, I mean, let's start by just using TypeScript a little bit to have a type for this here. So we can come up the top here and we can just create an interface for the, I'm going to call it nav routes. And that's just so we don't get confused with the built-in routes type that they have. They have a routes type. So I'm just going to call this nav routes, which is essentially going to be the same thing. So it's just going to be a key, a title, and a focused icon. I don't want the, basically they got this like unfocused icon. If you see it like this, oh, well, it's not working now. Let's have a look here. Yeah, so you see there's a love heart, but then it gets filled in solid when you click on it. I don't actually need that for my application, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And then I can just go ahead and I can say, well, we want the state to be of the nav routes, an array of nav routes here. And of course, you could probably clean this up even further by having these in a variable that you import from another file or something like that. But just to keep things simple, I'm just going to have the chats icon. And again, if you can come to the material design here, if you can't type in chat, for example, you can get all of these. So I just looked at the Facebook Messenger application and found some icons that are sort of similar enough. And then they all have the label associated with them. So you can just type in chat, for example. So yeah, I mean, you can have calls as well. I'm gonna make this uppercase though, which we'll use the video one for, and then I'll just Shift Alt down this twice. So we can have people, account, stories, book as the icon. And then we can go ahead and we can copy this down. So we can have the chats key, we can have the calls key, we can have the people key, and then we can have the stories key. So we'll be adding React Router as well, but it's not really necessary for these routes. It's more for like other routes that are off the main route, let's say. I don't know why this is erroring. Let's have a read through it. Do not define components during render. React will see a new component type on every render and destroy the entire subtree DOM node state. All right, so maybe I might have to define it how they're doing it. Still not convinced. But yeah, so we could just have something like chats calls people story, chats calls people stories. So yeah, so basically what we're doing here is for the screens component that we're using. It actually works. I'm just considering turning that link rule off. So we can already see that this has done what we want it to do. But essentially, to that component, you pass in this scene map thing, which has the keys of each of the titles corresponding to the key and the icon. And then it internally sort of manages the state. So based on this array here, this array of objects, whatever one's selected, it will know that and it can select the index of that. And then we can, have this index here for now, which keeps that track of that. And then there's this callback to set index. So it tells you which one is which. So we're actually not using the React router library for that. So that's okay, because we just want to use it. We don't have to use it for every single thing. This is sort of like in a web project you do, but on a mobile device, we only need the URL for like things that we're doing ourselves. For example, like if we're on the actual chats page and then we want to click on a specific chat, well, then it makes sense to, you can still just show a different component and hide this, but it becomes a little easier to just use the React router native library to do that sort of stuff. So we'll jump into that. I just want to sort of look at this for a second. Maybe I will just do it how they do it, which is like this. Let's see here. So, like, for example, let's have the chats route, which is just that. Even that, doesn't even like that. Do not define components during render. Okay, so if I have that there, it doesn't like that either. Great. So what can we do? Can we just turn that off? No unstable nested components. Probably we shouldn't turn that off. Let's have a look here. Okay, so that solves it for us. Obviously, we're losing some of the ES linking stuff for unstable components, but I sort of feel like it's just getting in the way at the moment. So let's just turn that off. Okay, great. So now we've done that and everything appears to be working. We can go ahead and we can start to add in the chat page. So let's do that. Now, we've just got like this flat folder structure here. So let's go ahead and create a source folder. And in the source folder, let's create a screens folder. And then in the screens folder, let's create a chats folder. And then in the chats folder, let's have an index.tsx. And I'm just going to use RAFCE. This is the web-based one. There might be a React Native library for this. But this gets the boilerplate up good enough for me. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. And then I'm just going to change this to a view. Delete that. Import view from React Native. I'm not seeing it. Let's just get this, gets us halfway there. View from React Native. Yeah. Oh, I thought I fixed this by having this here. I might run a Control Shift P. Is there a reload window? Will that work? Or do I actually need to close it and open again? Okay, so that looks better. I think when I updated the prettier, it didn't actually... now I'm wondering if this can be removed. Oh no, we'll add that back then. Okay, so yeah, okay, I guess we need to reload the window for those prettier effects to take hold. Kind of makes sense because the default settings that we've got in VS Code would be working there. So, okay, enough rambling. Let's get into it. Okay, so basically what I want to do is I want to firstly just display a list of users here. So I'm not going to give it a TypeScript type because this is just going to change. So I'm going to just have a friends, and this is just going to be a very simple object, which will just have an ID and a name here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy that down twice. Then I'll have a 2 and a 3 here. Let's become friends with Larry and Barry here. We can just go ahead and we can get that. While we're here, we'll probably want the text React Native component there. We'll probably want the style sheet. And then we haven't seen this yet, but there's also a component called pressable. And that's just like a button. It has a on press method rather than something like on click, because on a mobile device, you're not clicking, you're pressing. So it's just basically a button that you can wrap other components with, so you can have an event fire off. So let's just initialize our style sheet here. Oof, didn't want that. So we can have a const called styles here, and we can make use of the style sheet. We can go ahead and we can just run create. And then I'll just make a container. And then everything inside. So basically, I don't know if this is in an error state, but basically what we're creating here is this chats page here, everything above the navigation in this area here. That's what's currently, so if you look at the word chats here, that's what's currently getting rendered for that chats page. So we want to take up the remaining space. So this is where the flex1 property comes in handy. And then we'll just give that container a little bit of padding. So 16 pixels ought to do it. So then we can come to our view here. And then we can just chuck on this style here. Okay, great. So we can chuck on this style here. The styles container. And then we want to loop through all of our friends. So this is exactly how you would expect it to be. Same as React. So for each of the friends, we'll just go ahead and we'll render a button so they can click anywhere on that. So we'll just use the pressable here. Now pressable, it needs to have a key, and we can just use the friend ID for that. And then it's also going to have this on press method here. So that will just be like a callback. And for now, we'll just leave that blank, but we will use the navigation library or the React Native router library to navigate there. And so we can have a view here. So for each of these, we're going to get a particular we're going to get a particular friend that we're outputting. So we could even put this into a subcomponent if we wanted to. But just to keep things simple, I'll just leave it here for now. We'll probably come back to refactoring everything later on. So let's create a friend CSS class. So the friend, it can have a flex direction. We need to set that to row because it's a column by default. And if it's a row, we want the items across the minor axis. So in the Y direction or the column, we want to align the items to be centered. And then we just want to have a margin bottom just a little bit for each one. So there's space between each of the friends. And then while I'm here, I might as well do the last CSS property, which is the profile picture. The profile picture, you want a little bit of space between that and the text to the right of it. So I'm just going to have a margin right of 8 pixels here. So we can see that we've got this view here. And then we can go ahead and we can use the avatar from React Native paper. And then we can use the avatar image. This should be self-closing. We'll give it a size of 72 pixels. We'll give it a style of the styles.profile picture. And then we'll give it a source. So the source is an object itself. So we can have an object here with the URI of it. And then I'm going to use backticks here. So I can come, I think I've closed it now. Okay, I think the website is https ://random user. This is like an open source to generate random profile images. Again, we'll probably come back to something like this to get some user images. But they have portraits. The API, there's portraits to get the particular images. They got it for men and women. And then they have like a particular number. So I can actually use the ID that we have for the friends here to just generate something. And then I think it's a JPEG file. So I think something like that might work. And then we can have this other view. So remember, we've made this a row. This whole thing's a row. We want the image on the left, and then on the right we want the two text. So this will be a column by default, and then we can just have a text element in it, which will just be the friend name. And then if you look at Facebook Messenger app, you can actually see like the last message or some of the last message. So I'm just going to simulate that by saying this was the last message. They also have like the date you've seen it. So we're going to dive much deeper into like all that sort of stuff. But for now, we'll just hard code that. So profile picture, we've got that, and the style's friends. Let's have a look here. Okay. Oh, well, first thing, I want to change the index file. I want to call this the chat screen. I'm using index here rather than chat screen because I want to have some other components later on, just to avoid confusion between what the main file is for that particular feature or screen. So that means here we can just get the chat screens. So we can just go ahead and we can just use it like that. Chat screen dot source /screen/chats. I think that should be all right. Yeah, not really sure why that's not working. Let me just try close this and npm run Android again. Kind of looked like it was working for a second there. Is that not working? Looks like it's working. I think it's just bundling and loading, taking a little while. All right, so that looks like it's working. Let's just see. All right, great. So we've got some basic friends output there in this chat screen. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to click on that and I want to navigate to a singular chat screen. So I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to call it chat. And then I'm also going to have a index.tsx file in here. And I'm just going to generate a component here. And I'm just going to call this the chat screen. So this is the chat screen, not the chats screen. Let's just get a view here instead of a div. There probably is a library that, or an extension that helps with this. If you know anyone, comment below. I've just been too lazy to look for one. Yeah, why doesn't it give me the React Native type? React. All right, let's do this again. So we'll get this view. We can't do that. And it's going to come from React Native. So this page itself is going to be quite simple. So I think I'm just going to jump into React Native Paper and get the back action here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. And it's app bar with a lowercase b. So just make sure you don't do the uppercase b. So will this give me that? Okay, so now we need to add some like navigation. We probably want to make sure that this is similar to this here, where we got the flex 1, so it takes the remaining of the screen. So we can pretty much just copy this and delete all of that there. And then we can have a style here equal to the styles container. And then we can just import that real quick. So we got that there. I think below here, I'm going to have the view, which is going to have some text. And for now, it's just going to say chat ID. But this is just going to simulate like having dynamic data. So we can just go ahead and import, import that. Wasn't like that though. I'll come back to that. And then we probably just want, like, this app bar will take the full width of the screen. Then the text underneath, we probably just want to have a bit of padding. So let's just add the chat container here, which, just copy that down here. Add the word chat here. Container. Padding 16. So we haven't actually got this yet. So we need to actually set up the routing. Is that just complaining because that's not there? I don't know. We'll come back to that. So basically right now we've just got the screens. So if we come back to the app.tsx file here, basically we want to use React router. So we can actually wrap our application, which is everything. Well, right now it's just this. So we have these providers around it. We need to have this native router. And then we also need to have the routes wrapper around this if we're going to use a route. So a route, this is the self-closing tag. This will just take a path here. So by default, we can just send it to the /path. And then I'll have the element here. And this will be the screens element. So even though we're navigating to like different pages, like this screens component is sort of like making it such that it's showing a different component. And the reason I'm doing it like that is because this React Native paper UI library, it not only shows you the bottom of the, the bottom tabs, but also puts the page and it wraps those, it sort of couples those two components together, which I don't think is ideal, but with those limitations, I've decided to bundle it into the route. It's all fine. It doesn't really matter because we're not in a web project. It's just a little strange to me. Of course, if you really wanted to route to it, you could just use a use effect hook, like a life cycle hook with a, so on instantiation or on render, it can navigate to the particular path if you need it, but I don't need it. So I'm quite happy to just render out the components to this. I'm more thinking of getting to the specific chat page because it doesn't have the bottom navigation stuff on the specific chat screen, which is why I've put this stuff in a route. And then I'll probably want to have another route which will go to a dynamic path. So I'm going to say /chat/:chat ID, which corresponds to this chat ID that I'm going to extract. So basically from the chat screen, when we click on a profile or a chat, I want to navigate to that particular ID, and then based on that chat ID, or it might even be the user ID, but we'll come back to that. When we add real data, I want to show the element, the chat screen element. So I'll save that. Probably need to import that and that. So yeah, so let's add that navigation stuff in from chats. So it's really quite simple. All we need to do is put our hook up the top here, and we'll have a navigate function here, which we can access by the use navigate hook, which is coming from React Router Native. We can just say here, we just want to navigate, and we just want to navigate to /chat, to the particular ID. So we can just go ahead and we can save that. So that should get us from all of the friends. And then it'll go to this path here. And then this path here, it will give us the chat screen here. So, and similarly, we want a way to be able to get back to the chat screen. And by default, the chat screen is the initial screen. Now, if it wasn't, maybe that'd be a use case for using some URLs for these routes here. And if it turns out we need that, we can go ahead and set that up. But I don't think we need that, at least not at this stage here. So we'll follow the Yagni, you ain't gonna need it principle. So we won't over engineer too early. We'll just deal with it when it comes. So yeah, let's just go ahead and copy this in here. So this is a individual chat now. So we actually, we can just navigate back to the home page here, because that will take us back to the, well, our home page is the chats page. So that just happens to work out nicely. Now we can use the params to get the params. So let's get the chat ID. So we can destructure that from the use params. So let's bring that in. And let's also bring this in here. So yeah, the way that works is, well, we've already seen how this route renders. So we're navigating to that route. This is a dynamic part, the chat ID. I mean, honestly, I think that's probably the wrong variable name, but I'll come back to that. And then we'll get that out. And then based on that, we can show that. And then that exactly how we've done it there, that's how we're going to show, you know, the particular user, or based on the friend ID, we can make the request. You know, we can hit the cache, get the previous messages quickly, and all of that sort of stuff. Future messages will be able to send there. Have the room number, all this sort of stuff. So, I mean, again, I'll come back to that when we're using real data. Still trying to figure out why this is erroring. So let's just hover over this, read this, try to figure something out. So I'm not really sure why that's erroring at the moment, but if you look at the application, it seems to work. Maybe we need to reload or something like that. Or might be missing a property or something. But if we come here, we see that we got the chat ID of 1. We can come back. And for the second, we can see the chat ID of 2. And so on. So we can see that we've set up our React Native application. So this was just an introductory. This was a real beginner's tutorial. But it also shows you how to use the React Native paper library and the React router native library. How to do some basic stuff here, get some different pages going, using components and that navigation stuff there. So based on those fundamentals, in the next video, we're going to set up the authentication pages. So we're going to protect the routes. We're going to have the sign up and the login. So we're going to use our Nest.js API for that. And then we're going to use Axios to do some of the interception of the tokens and stuff like that. So we can have these as protected pages. And we'll also do the JSON Web Token stuff. User sign up, hashing the password and all that sort of stuff that gets handled in the back end. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for that next video. Thanks so much. Cheers.